Today we're going to talk about, kind of sticking with the theme about understanding the truth. Life is a miracle. And really what it's going to be is going to be a discussion of the birds and the bees. And in particular, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be looking at it as a biology version. I'm not going to look at it so much in function, but in terms of biology. I want to actually get into it because I get a lot of questions through the WellsNet Q&A board, through the CLR Q&A board. I get a lot of questions from people wanting to know about birth control, and what should I use, and what shouldn't I use, and how does it work. And there's a lot of these things that most people don't know, and I would go as far as to say a lot of physicians don't know. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking that their general practitioner, when they go to visit with him or her, that they know all this stuff. So they can just assume. So if the doctor says, well, I think you need to go on the combination pill, or I think I want to put you on Depo-Provera, I want to put you on the cervical cath, or whatever he wants to do, you assume he or she knows everything about all that. And they don't. And I don't say that in a negative sense. It's just the reality. Medicine is so comprehensive, it demands so much, they just don't always know. And a good example, this is going to date already 25, 26 years ago, when I was a parish pastor in Plymouth, Wisconsin, we used to play cards with our family doctor. And he lived one street up from us, and he came down. We were playing cards, and he had spoken at the Sheboygan County chapter of Wisconsin Right to Life. He was a main speaker for it and everything. And I was telling them at that time, some of you who've been around a long time, remember very early in our history, there was a big controversy in the Wells about birth control. And if you use birth control, were you killing children, those kinds of things. And I was just talking to him about that. And I said, well, what did you learn in medical school? He said, 1 hour. He said, we had 1 hour on birth control in medical school. And he said, what they did is they basically told you that these are the kinds of complications you may have. And so this is the adjustments you make. These are the corrective actions you take. So they generally don't know. So I'm going to tell you some things that some might know, maybe some things that they won't like. I'm going to give it to you, however, from a Christian perspective. And to begin with, just starting off with this, for you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. It's a fundamental truth. You're created by God. And the one thing that seems to happen with people is as you and I walk closer into how medicine works, it's almost as if like we don't think of it in terms of God anymore. We begin to think of it in terms of, well, I suppose we should have started having children sooner, or I wish we hadn't waited so long, or and we begin to think about it all in terms of it's up to me. So I'm going to talk to you today. I cannot imagine that it's possible to study the way the reproductive cycle works within a woman and walk away not being awed by the creative power of God. Because it's absolutely an incredible orchestration that has to occur in order for life to begin. Now, how I got involved in this, in 1998, I wrote 6 articles in our magazine on the subject of birth control. A lot of you know it because we ended up, people said, well, can you provide those articles for us? So we created this little booklet called The Christian Birth Control. We've sold thousands of them. People are always asking for them. In fact, we never get around to updating it. So if you order it now, you get this whole chunk put into the middle of it of addendum stuff, because just trying to stay current on it. And in that book, I quote out of the standard operative mechanisms of hormonal birth control, which says it operates in one of 3 ways. It either prevents ovulation, it thickens the mucus plug to prevent passage of sperm through the cervix, which also has a kind of a side effect of perhaps slowing the mobility of sperm to be able to travel up the fallopian tubes. And then the third mechanism, which is the one that we're most concerned about, and that's the mechanism where it prevents implantation of an embryo. Scripture is crystal clear about when life begins. I was sinful from birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me. There is no doubt in Scripture, without exception, every church body that permits abortion will deny portions of Scripture that do not agree with that way of thinking, with that doctrine. So they'll deny Psalm 51:5. They think Psalm 139 is kind of nice, kind of melodic, but they won't necessarily lend it any type of real credence. So this is what got me going on this journey, because I wanted to understand. Those of you who know me a long time or know my parents know that I almost never take anything on face value. I challenge and I test everything because I want to make sure it's right. So I'm actually looking on a new birth control book. I've done a lot of work. I've read hundreds of medical papers. And in reading those papers, I was really hopeful to have it done last year. I was hopeful to have it done this year. I really need time. But there's a chance I can get it done in 2013. I've gotten a lot of help from different people. Dr. Kevin Voss, who's head of the bioethics department at Concordia University, does a lot of help for getting me the papers and so forth that I need. I run different segments by a friend of mine, Dr. Walt Larimore, some of our Wells doctors. I've talked things through. So if all goes well, I could probably wrap this thing up and get it out, because quite honestly, there still is nothing out there. And in this approach, there's going to be, I see it as a threefold approach. I'm going to do a detailed book, which is going to be, like I told somebody, it's going to have pictures. So there's a detailed book on reproduction. It's going to have pictures. Don't blush, but it's going to have pictures. And I'm going to explain some of the things I'm going to show you this morning. The second thing is I'm going to create a handbook, kind of something that the way the Christian birth control book is used now is pastors use it as a handout in pre-marriage counseling. And that's why we get them ordered like 25 at a crack by churches. They're the primary ones to purchase it. We do have a college and a seminary that also purchase it for students. But the idea is that it's something small people are going to read. Because you won't want to sit and, it isn't like I'm going to cuddle up by the fireplace and read the detailed version. Okay. Then the third version actually came by the suggestion of Dr. Bondo, who's on our board. And he said, can you also create something for the secular doctor? And so the third, I'm going to create it in kind of a secular way that's going to respect the majesty of the Creator, but it's not going to get very religious. It's going to be very secular and explain the facts. Okay, this fellow here is actually a kind of a superior high-tech graphic artist. I want you to listen, and hopefully this will all work for volume and everything. I want you to listen carefully.
At Yale University in the Department of Medicine. And my job was to write many of the algorithms in code for NASA to do virtual surgery in preparation for the astronauts going into deep space flight so they could be cut in robotic pods. One of the fascinating things about what we were actually working on is that we were seeing, using the new kind of scanning technologies, things that had never been seen before. I mean, not only in disease management, but also things that allowed us to see things about the body that just made you marvel. I remember one of the first times we were looking at collagen, and your entire body, everything, your hair, skin, bone, nails, everything is made of collagen, and it's a kind of a rope-like structure that twirls and swirls like this, and the only place that collagen changes its structure is in the corner of your eye. In your eye, it becomes a grid formation, and therefore it becomes transparent as opposed to opaque. So perfectly organized a structure, it was hard not to attribute divinity to it, because we kept on seeing this over and over and over again in different parts of the body. One of the opportunities I had was one person was working on a really interesting kind of micromagnetic resonance imaging machine with the NIH, and what we were going to do is scan a new project on the development of the fetus from conception to birth using these kinds of new technologies. So I wrote the algorithms in code, and he built the hardware. Paul Lauterborough then went on to win the Nobel Prize for inventing the MRI. I get the data. And I'm going to show you a sample of that piece from conception to birth. Thank you. But as you can see, when you actually start working on this data, it's pretty spectacular. And as we kept on scanning more and more, working on this project, looking at these two simple cells that had this kind of unbelievable machinery that will become the magic of you. And as we kept on working on this data, looking at small clusters of the body, these little, pieces of tissue that were the trophoblast coming off of the blastocyst, all of a sudden burrowing itself into the side of the uterus, saying, I'm here to stay. All of a sudden having a conversation of communications of the estrogens, the progesterones, saying, I'm here to stay, plant me, building this incredible trilinear fetus that becomes within 44 days something that you can recognize, and then at 9 weeks is really like a kind of a little human being. The marvel of this information, how do we actually have this biological mechanism inside our body to actually see this information? I'm going to show you something pretty unique. Here's a human heart at 25. It's just basically 2 strands. And like this magnificent origami, cells are developing at 1 million cells per second at 4 weeks as it's just folding on itself. Within 5 weeks, you can start to see the early atrium and the early ventricles. 6 weeks, these folds are now beginning with a papilla in the inside of the heart, actually being able to pull down each one of those valves in your heart until you get actually a mature heart, and then basically the development of the entire human body. The magic of the mechanisms inside each genetic structure saying exactly where that nerve cell should go. The complexity of these, the mathematical models on how these things are indeed done are beyond human comprehension. Even though I am a mathematician, I look at this with a marvel of how do these instruction sets not make these mistakes as they build what is us. It's a mystery, it's magic, it's divinity. I mean, then when you start to take a look at an adult life, take a look at this little tuft of capillaries. It's just a tiny substructure, microscopic, but basically by the time you're at 9 months and you've given birth, you have almost 60,000 miles of vessels inside your body. I mean, and only 1 mile is visible, 59,999 miles that are basically bringing nutrients and taking waste away. The complexity of building that within a single system is, again, beyond any comprehension of any existing mathematics today. And that instruction set from the brain to every other part of the body. Look at the complexity of the folding. Where is this intelligence of knowing that a fold can actually hold more information? So as you actually watch the baby's brain grow, and this is one of the things that we're doing right now. We're actually doing a longitudinal studies of actually scanning babies' brains from the moment they're born every 6 months until they're 6 years old. We're going to be doing actually about 250 children, watching exactly how the jirai and the sukai of the brains fold to see how this magnificent develop.
A couple of times he kept saying, it's divinity behind it. And he sees this. I would highly recommend, I threw the website up there, visualmd.com. I would highly recommend, take a look at it. He doesn't just deal with beginning of life issues. He's got all sorts of magnetic resonating work on there, and it's remarkable. It's a remarkable website. And so definitely take time to take a look at it. Okay, we're going to talk about biology basics, the players. First of all, the circulatory blood system is a player. I want you to think of the blood system. I couldn't find an animated GIF to illustrate this the way I wanted to. But what I really want to communicate to you is that your blood system has a way of detecting what's going on in your body. So it's not, don't think of it linear. Don't think of it as if, okay, a message comes from here, it travels through the blood system, and today, tomorrow, the next day, it gets down to your feet and says, oh, I'm cold. What it does is that it seems to have this incredible ability to be the conduit. It's, if you work with computers at all, you know about what's called handshaking with computers, the ability to kind of communicate back and forth. That's what your blood system does. That's the circulatory system, is the communication line. Secondly, you have the endocrine system. I do have to tell you, this was a bit embarrassing. I was creating this graphic, I found the graphic, but it came naked. So I'm sitting in the office, I have this naked graphic up, and I'm trying to find fig leaves. And in the process of finding fig leaves, my daughter walks in. It just said, stick around, there'll be fig leaves on it. But actually, the endocrine system, which is glands, I found this very interesting. There's the thymus. The thymus primarily controls the immune system. By the way, when you study glands in the Bible, they control a variety of things. But when we talk about HIV/AIDS, and it affects what they call the T cells, the T cells begin to lose their ability to do it. The thymus actually educates T cells. It teaches T cells what to fight against and what not to fight against. This comes into a little bit of play. Once in a while you'll encounter somebody who will have a pregnancy and their own body fights against it. And it has a little bit to do with the thymus and some other things. Then you've got the adrenals. The adrenals are the stress hormones. They're the ones that kind of keep you going. It's the kind of thing that allows you to get up at 2 in the morning, work till 4, go back to bed for a half hour, and be ready for a presentation at 10:35. So the adrenals, when we talk about adrenal glands and so forth, they're located on the top of the kidneys. You've got the pancreas. We lost my mother-in-law through pancreatic cancer. She's sitting with God right now, probably amusing herself over us doing all these things. And pancreatic cancer affects the digestive system, and that's why when Paul was here talking about end-of-life issues and so forth, there are times when you're facing end-of-life issues. Pancreatic cancer is a good example where the body begins to lose its ability to digest and so forth. And I remember Virginia, when we were kind of watching her and they were getting ready to kind of relocate her, she'd asked for a cracker. I gave her a half a cracker and she threw it out. She wasn't able to digest it. And so to force feed or something like that, somebody in that condition would have been painful, agonizing, and resulted in death. Quicker death. But that's what the pancreas. Pancreas is tied to the digestive system. Pineal is the sleep end. I don't know anything about this organ. I don't think I was born with one, but it kind of controls the sleep cycle. And then we talk about thyroid. Now, a lot of people will say, well, I'm on thyroid medication and so forth. I can leave this better to a physician, but I believe with a lot of people, thyroid controls energy, but it's the parathyroids. There's 4 of them. They're located in the back part. That's the calcium balance. So a lot of times women will go through concerns that if they have a thyroid, they say they have a thyroid problem, they need to get calcium supplements. It's really more of a parathyroid issue. Okay, now glands release hormones. So you got to think of them like communicators. So they're tapping out messages, and the glands release hormones. They get into the blood system. They communicate messages around. You cut yourself, you get an infection. You're working out in the woods, cut yourself, you get an infection. The thymus sends out signals. We've got a problem here. The white blood cells go out there. They begin to handle it. That's kind of how it works. This is the part we're not concerned about today. Okay, but it gives you a little background. This is the part we're concerned about. We start with the hypothalamus. A lot of people talk about it being the control center. Disney used to do this thing. What was it called? Body control, mind control, mission control. But it was a cute animated thing where a person's up in the brain and they're controlling everything. The hypothalamus, I have up there, hunger, thirst, fatigue, nervous system. Think of it like mission control, just for our sake right here, because we're going to talk reproduction. Mission control. Okay, pituitary gland is the thing that controls reproduction. And then we're talking about a woman's body. The pituitary gland controls growth and reproduction. The hypothalamus communicates with the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is the head lieutenant. It's the field warrior. It's the captain that says, okay, we got to get out there. We're going to get ready. We're going to have another, it's that time of the month. We've got to go through a cycle. And then you've got the ovaries. The ovaries are the other glands that are actively involved. Remember I said that the circulatory system is not linear. It's communicating back and forth. So you're going to find that a lot of times when a woman goes around in her menstrual cycle, there's this looping thing going on. There's messages going to the ovaries sending messages back to the pituitary gland, they're going back and forth. This all happens simultaneous. And so you'll get loops. That's why it's hard sometimes to understand what's actually happening when you're trying to read about it and study it, because a lot of this stuff sometimes occurs simultaneous. All right, this is probably the part that most people are familiar with when we talk about reproductive organs. Of concern for us, we're going to talk about the cervix. This is where either sperm would enter, or if you develop the cervical plug, it would occur there. The uterine lining, also called the endometrium lining, is either going to have a friendly or non-friendly condition for accepting an embryo. And then you've got 2 ovaries. part of the incredible way that the body works, generally it works ovary right, ovary left, ovary right, ovary left. And it does this back and forth throughout your fertile lifetime. It goes back and forth. And it gets picked up by these and comes down the fallopian tubes, and fertilization occurs in here, depending on when. Okay, now, excuse me, the hypothalamus starts pulsating, usually in a girl about the age of 8. Around 8 years old, it's just a pulse, and then nothing. And then a little another pulse, and nothing. And she continues to grow, but it begins already around the age of 8. And as they get older, and an average of age 12, it begins to develop a cycle. And it's a cycle of pulsing between longer, large, and short cycles. And now those become the telegraphing that goes from the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland. And it's called, what it's called gonadotropin releasing hormone. And that's what it is. Now remember, don't get lost in the terms. That's one of the big dangers you get when you study this. Is this some desk nerd who decides to give it this long name? But all it really, it's a hormone. It's what the hypothalamus sends out to the pituitary gland. It's just a signal. It starts with a pulse, and once it gets regular or longer pulses, it begins to signal the pituitary gland to release. So think of it as a chain. So it goes to the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland's getting this signal. The signal it's getting is, first of all, just going back here for a moment, remember that long pulses releases FSH, close pulses releases LH. This all. Long pulses, we're talking about releasing FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. Follicle is what you have inside an ovary. This is an ovary, remember? I gave you, the material I gave you is enough artwork to be dangerous. I figure you can look at it, trying to keep track of what I'm talking about. You can maybe scribble notes without giving you all the slides. So we've got the follicle. Now the thing you have to remember about follicles, and this has been a debate in the abortion rights movement, follicles are, think of them in terms of undeveloped eggs inside the ovaries. And every woman is born, generally speaking, every woman is born with 1 to 2 million follicles. When you're born, and this has been very controversial, some countries have talked about having late-term abortions in which they harvest the ovaries and then they use the follicles, they try to mature the follicles so that they can use those for implantation in somebody else later on. And right now, we've talked about frozen embryos in the past, working with in vitro fertilization. Well, now there's been some success. It's considered now a viable infertility treatment to freeze eggs. So before fertilization, freezing eggs, which I think is going to heighten attention again about harvesting ovaries from aborted children. Because that's when you have the most. Because you notice that by the time you're 12 years old, by the time of your first period, you're down to 400,000. Now 400,000 is still a lot, but it's 400,000. If you have any kind of negative ovarian condition where the woman is diagnosed as having a fertility issue, chances are she's going to have less follicles. Can you imagine how much fun it was raising 5 daughters? Okay, so we're talking about follicle-stimulating hormones. These are all players in the whole reproductive cycle. Now the other one, remember the other one, is the luteinizing hormone. And the luteinizing hormone works with the follicle-stimulating hormone in maturing the egg and releasing it for ovulation. Remember that we're in an ovary. All right, when the follicle-stimulating hormone begins, it does exactly that. It stimulates the follicle. Stimulates, and there's a few that start up, but then one kind of rises to the top. You know what I mean? Not physically rises, but becomes the focus one. And that one begins to mature. And they always show it in the charts like a cycle. It goes around like that. I don't think it necessarily goes around like that, but it just kind of rises to the top, and it begins to mature. This is follicle stimulating. Then you get what's called an LH surge, a luteinizing hormone surge. Why? Because the ovary is a gland. So the ovary is communicating back to the pituitary gland. Things are changing here, things are changing. We got one maturing, we got one coming along. And at the right time, that LH sends a follicle stimulating hormone, the ovary, sends a signal back to the pituitary gland and says, now we got to push. It's kind of like your first delivery, not the baby delivery. We're just delivering an egg. So it sends this what's called LH surge, and that leads us to the egg, which is sometimes called an ovum. It releases it on day 14. So it triggers ovulation. That's what the LH surge does. You got to understand all this when you start talking about, do I take the pill, do I take the shot, do I take... Because you got to understand that it's the way they trick the body is important. Okay, now, estrogen, called the female sex hormone. Actually, men have it too, but it's a primary